We're going to do a brief stop with Christine de Pizan. So she's born in Venice in 1364. She's a poet and the court writer in France. She's likely the first woman to earn a living as a writer. We don't know of anyone earlier, and she's best known for these books, the Book of the City of Ladies and The Treasure of the City of Ladies. And these are the first two feminist books ever written. She has three allegorical figures: reason, rectitude, and justice. So she has them personified in the book, and they have a dialogue about women's position and whether women and men have the same virtues. And this is what's important, because if they have the same virtues, then they deserve the same rights. So she argues that both sexes are created in God's image, they both have souls, and thus both are more than capable of living virtuous lives. And so she populates her city with exemplary women from the Old Testament, with female saints, and with righteous women from antiquity, just to show examples of righteous women who should have full human rights. And she also rewrites the story of Medusa. So she's rewritten as a woman who deserved protection from the male violence that she endured. And this is the first time, as far as we know, that anyone has done this.
What is her name?
This is Christine de Pizan. Yeah. She also went out of her way to hire a woman to illustrate her books. So there's a little bit of solidarity there from one woman to another who needs to earn a living. We only know her first name, Anastasia. We don't know anything else about her, but she's the one who made these pictures. Some of her other works are lost to time. We know the titles, but we have no idea what they were. But these two books survived, and in fact, periodically they're reprinted, up to and including Simone de Beauvoir. So it's a direct line. So she lays out the argument for universal human rights in the 14th century. Okay. Copernicus, so a few centuries later, and we get the scientific revolution, and that paves the way for the Enlightenment. So this is why. Usually Copernicus's book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, and that's in 1543, and this is considered the beginning of this time period. So why does this book provoke so much change? And it's because basic observations about the solar system can be made by anyone. Even without a telescope, though that certainly helps, but anyone can observe an eclipse, right? And you realize that the sun does not revolve around the earth. So the church is completely wrong. And they're willing to kill people over this because they're wrong and they can't admit it. But using rationality and reason, the true nature of the universe, the laws of motion, the law of gravity, the nature of life, chemistry, and biology, they can be explored and explained. So it's not about the church anymore. This is a huge challenge. There's a burgeoning belief in the ability of humans to discover knowledge instead of just receive it passively from the church. And the church starts to look like so much superstitious nonsense standing in the way of progress. I don't think it's possible to overstate the role of the printing press in the scientific revolution. There were printing presses in China a few centuries before Europe, and they used either clay or wood type. But in Europe, it's, of course, Johannes Gutenberg. He starts experimenting with his press, and by 1450, he's got it perfect. So for the first time, scholars and scientists could easily consult each other's work. You didn't have to be in the same room. It could travel over continents, and they're able to build on it. So there's this sudden, huge acceleration of the knowledge-building process. And crucially, with the invention of engraved metal plates, you have schematic diagrams and things like maps and botanical and anatomical drawings. All of this could be distributed, and this had never happened before. So there's the printing press. So during the scientific revolution, people began to reject received authority, and that rejection spreads. It's gonna. Monarchs assert that their power is handed down from God, but now there are cracks in the foundation. So Thomas Hobbes comes up with the concept of the social contract. Humans have a propensity for war and violence, and even the humans who are more moderate will be forced to turn to violent action against the ruthless among us. He includes both women and men. Yes, men are stronger, but they do have to sleep, was his famous line. So we need some form of government to protect us from the worst of us. And the social contract is the agreement that we all hand over our capacity for violence to a ruler or a legislature, and in return, the governing body gives everyone protection. That's supposed to be how it works. And that's called the social contract. So citizens don't obey because God told them to. This is crucial. They obey because they're making a rational decision that life is better if we agree to a government. John Locke upends the whole idea of the divine right of kings arguing instead for a doctrine of natural rights. Every human is born free and equal. These rights are ours. They aren't granted to us by the king or the government. We're born with them. And from there, he argued that government had to be both limited and conditional. A ruler had obligations to the people and the public good and was bound by the rule of law. And this is the first formulation of the principle of capital L liberalism. It lays the foundation for the American, the French, and the Haitian revolutions. Montesquieu argued that government should be constitutional, that power should be separated into legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Does that sound familiar? He argued for the necessity of civil liberties, innocent until proven guilty, the right to a fair trial, freedom of speech and assembly. He also argued for an end to slavery, so this is bubbling up. And the Roman Catholic Church added his book, The Spirit of the Laws, to the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. So that's the list of prohibited books, big list that the church kept. You're not allowed to read this book, but it's enormously influential, of course, to the founding fathers of the United States. Now we have Rousseau. He wrote a book called The Social Contract, and Rousseau challenged the traditional structure of society organized by laws established by decree of the rulers of the church. He argued that laws are binding only if people agree to them. He is known for his belief in the equality of all men, and I do mean men. It didn't apply to women. He was very clear about that. And this comes back in the French Revolution. Voltaire. So his work focused on religious tolerance and separation of church and state. I think I actually have a timeline here, right? I didn't advance the slide. So at one point he has to flee to Paris for his own safety because his books created such an uproar. But these were very radical ideas, and they still are in many parts of the world. I never want us to forget that. We have won these rights, but half the world has not won them. Okay, we get in short order the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Haitian Revolution, and they are all based on these ideas of the Enlightenment. The Marquis de Condorcet has been called the last witness of the age of the Enlightenment, and he argued for constitutional government, public education. He served as the president of the French Abolition Society, and he advocated for equal rights for people of all races and all religions, and he included women. He wrote an essay called On the Admission of Women to the Rights of Citizenship. It's a French guy, the Marquis de Condorcet, Condorcet. On the admission of women to the rights of citizenship, arguing that women possess the same capacity for reason and morality as men, and therefore had the same natural rights and should be allowed full participation in politics and society. He participated in the French Revolution in 1789, and he served as a Paris representative in the Legislative Assembly, and then he was secretary. And then guess what happened? The Reign of Terror hit. He was arrested and he died in jail, because that's what the Reign of Terror was. So yay, left-wing authoritarianism. We should have learned this lesson, and I have to say, I didn't. And here we are. So it was just a short 5 years from that revolution, the French Revolution, to 29,000 people dying in the Reign of Terror. Okay, so one cautionary tale among many. So the French Revolution creates a huge explosion in Europe, around the world. Women play pivotal roles. It was foundational to modern feminism. Universal equality becomes a demand. Okay, women can speak out loud and advocate for, and it's a whole bunch of women do it. And I will repeat this when we get to 1970, but you teach slaves to read, and eventually they revolt. Eventually, they write their own political theory, and eventually they create their own political movement, and that's what happens. So one example, right on the heels of the French Revolution, with its declaration that all men are equal, came the Haitian Revolution. So it's the first major slave uprising since Spartacus, and this one did eventually win complete independence. But it was also quite brutal. It involved rape and all kinds of atrocities. That's way bigger than we can get into here. But, okay. So we're going to go back a minute. There's some feminist criticisms of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. The progression of the human race is all of nature is alive. There's cosmic cycles of birth and death, regeneration. These are personified in various female forms and in animals. But as civilizations rise and decay, like we talked about yesterday, they destroy the land, the sacredness is drained from the world, and it's removed to a sky god who is distant and punishing. Then the Enlightenment kills him off and puts science in its place. And I would so much rather live in a secular society than one ruled by religion, so don't get me wrong, but the results are not all good. So this image of the earth as a living body persisted in the West until the co-joined scientific and commercial revolutions. So something has to kill her off, and indeed they did. So this is Carolyn Merchant's ovular work, The Death of Nature. This is her entire subject. And this is a quote: "Between the 16th and 17th centuries, the image of an organic cosmos with a living female earth at its center gave way to a mechanistic worldview in which nature was reconstructed as dead and passive, to be dominated and controlled by humans." Oops, there's a slide missing. Oh well. The new technology of domination included a vast array of things that had never been invented before. And that list is essentially a list of torture implements for the living earth. Merchant calls this the mechanization of nature, and it has, of course, only gotten worse. It also had to be paid for. And the large commercial banks all owned mines, which required enormous stretches of timber for the charcoal and the smelting, because that's what goes into metallurgy. The destruction of the earth to fuel and then fund more of the same. So it's a nasty, vicious circle. With the end of the forests came the beginning of coal. The new technologies would be powered by fossil fuels, and with essentially unlimited power, there would be no limits to the destruction. The only constraint left was cultural, but the concept of a living world would be finally severed on the dissection slab of mechanistic science. So now we have Susan Griffin. We mentioned her yesterday. But the deepest feminist critique of patriarchal science and its misogynist death urge is Susan Griffin. And it's really hard to pull a quote because this book is so dense. It's a profound and poetic analysis of how the patriarchal mind separates mind from body, spirit from matter, man over woman, and animal and earth. And it's how science has been a horrifying accelerant of the dominator paradigm. So this is a quote. His will pervades all matter. He sees no boundaries. He tolerates no entanglements. Nothing must slow him down. Slowness is his enemy. If he engenders children, he does not remember them. Memory is his enemy. He does not stay in one place. He never spends time. Time is his executor. In his quest for greater and greater speed, he casts away whatever gives him weight. Weight is his enemy. He seeks weightlessness. He casts away excess. He does not tolerate the superfluous. He wants only the essential. His life is reduced to the essential. At the speed of light, which he longs for, he would shed even his body. But still he would have weight. Still gravity would determine his path. Still he would curve toward the earth. He glides as quickly as he can over the surface. He does not want to touch the earth. Friction is his enemy. The smell of friction is the smell of burning, is the smell of death. He cannot afford to think of death. Death is the commander of his enemies. He sheds his knowledge of death. He cannot afford to live. He cannot afford to fear. The air is filled with anxiety. Space is filled with longing. He must traverse space instantly. He must not give in to longing. He must take the air by surprise. He must not give in to terror. As his speed increases, so does his power. He takes everything. And the whole book is like this. And like I said yesterday, it's an amazing book, and you really should read it if you never have. It's very hard to pick a quote because it's all just so dense with the truth of her analysis of this culture. So, she's got this great analysis of the scientific revolution. Okay, so Francis Bacon is considered the father of the scientific revolution. He argued that man may be regarded as the center of the world, for the whole world works together in the service of man. Plants and animals of all kinds are made to furnish him, and all things seem to be going about man's business and not their own. So, nature is the base material for men's actualization, and men should use her. The dominion granted by science would let men, quote, change, transmute, and fundamentally alter nature. He bluntly stated that the goal of all authoritarian techniques, such a deep understanding of nature's secrets that men's power over her would be practically unlimited. Well, Bacon's vision is now here. Industrial technology has emptied rivers, crushed mountains, and damaged the climate itself, its power only limited because the planet has in fact turned out to be finite. So that's the scientific revolution and feminist critiques of it. So back to our early history. Olympe de Georges, she's a passionate advocate of human rights. She was called, did I turn it off? Did I turn it off? No, I did not. I've got no idea what just happened there. It just hates me. Hello. The passionate advocate of human rights. She's one of the earliest opponents of slavery, She wrote plays and pamphlets on a range of feminist issues like marriage and divorce, children's rights, unemployment, the social safety net. This has been going on a long time, people. She welcomed the revolution, but felt keenly that women were left out, because of course they were. And ultimately, guess what? She's guillotined during the Reign of Terror. Madame de Stael, was a fierce advocate for the abolition of slavery. She produced a huge body of literary novels and plays. It's all political, a lot of historical writing as well. She's at the center of all the tumult of the French Revolution. She left an enduring imprint on European intellectual thought. She's a strong supporter of Romanticism, and she helped to bolster that movement. But she had to live in exile for huge periods of her life. She did manage to evade execution, but she had to live in other countries because they were coming for her. And then finally, we have Mary Court, who was arrested, publicly flogged, and then spent the rest of her life sentenced to an insane asylum. So this is what the Reign of Terror did. And her friends Pauline Léon and Claire Lacombe were also arrested, later released, but they continued to receive ridicule and abuse for their activism, and they basically lived in terror forever. So this is what happens when the left decides that you're 1 degree off from the accepted, the whatever of the time. These were all people who helped build the French Revolution. They argued for all the correct things and just murdered by the thousands. So we've already seen it. All right, Mary Wollstonecraft. Yes. One of the founding mothers of feminism. She wrote thoughts on the education of daughters based on her own experience of poverty. She taught herself French and Italian so she could work as a translator. She had no option. She had to find work. She wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Men in 1790. This was a defense of the French Revolution for the English public. And then 2 years later, she writes A Vindication of the Rights of Women, for which we all love her. Women only seem inferior to men because they are denied education. This was what she argued. Women deserve the same fundamental rights as men. So instead of treating women as ornaments for men, as property to be traded by men, she argued that we are human beings who deserve the same fundamental rights. And she also argued for coeducational schooling with boys and girls together. And this is this great quote that this is probably her most famous quote. Taught from their infancy that beauty is women's scepter, the mind shapes itself to the body, and roaming around its gilt cage only seeks to adorn its prison. So that's femininity. She's in France for the guillotining of King Louis XVI, and she's betrayed by the Jacobins and their disdain for women in the Reign of Terror. So they refuse to grant women equal rights. They scathingly call feminists, quote, Amazons, and they wanted women to be subordinate as helpers to men. This is the model that Rousseau came up with. So his vision comes true. So they all start arguing for this. The terror starts. She's in France for this. Many of her friends are killed, and she was placed under surveillance. The only reason she escaped the same fate was because her lover was an American, and he went to the American embassy, and he said, we're married. And so they let her go. He lied. They never got married, but they believed him because he was a man, I guess. So she was able to escape, and she had to leave France because they would have killed her. So she died in 1797, very young, because she gave birth to Mary Shelley. She got a postpartum infection, and that's how women died. If she'd had access to a D&C and some antibiotics, she would have lived, but life was very hard for women, and of course remains hard. So 2 things. You'll see this one over and over. Women learn political analyses and some language to describe domination and subordination from their time in the male left, but then they apply it to women. And they come up with something completely different. And that's called feminism. And they have to, because the men on the left treat them so badly. Okay, there's always some allies who are like, this is wrong, blah, blah, blah. But by and large, the male left will continuously abandon women. And that's all you see in history, over and over and over. Then they betray women in all kinds of ways, but women have to come up with our own analysis and ultimately form our own independence movement. So that's number 1. But second, the vindication of the rights of women inspires the next generation of women to take up the fight, including Elizabeth Barrett Browning, George Eliot, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and we'll be hearing more about those last 2 in the next slide. But into the 20th century, Virginia Woolf, Emma Goldman, Simone de Beauvoir, they all claim her as a foremother. So her influence was still felt 150 years later. Her book keeps going out of print, and then somebody reprints it. And then it starts getting faded, and somebody brings it back. It's that important of a document. So she dies in 1797. 5 decades later, 50 years, it's July 1848, and women arrive at Seneca Falls. So this is the run-up to this in America now. There's a Reverend Charles Grandison Finney, and he's an American Presbyterian minister. He's a leader in what's called the Second Great Awakening. Now, that's this huge upswell of religious sentiment that's across the country. It's like a mania, but it's deeply tied to these movements for social change. So it's like the groundswell, the abolition movement, very like the socialists and the labor movement, and this is where feminism really starts to get purchase in America. And they carry the prophetic voice of the Christian tradition, and they make a very radical claim for the equality of all people, men and women, black and white, everybody has to be included. And this group of people specifically, along with the Quakers, they feel called by God to make justice a reality. So this is their motivating force, is religion. And whatever we think about religion, history tells us this does happen sometimes. So the people take religions that we might otherwise reject. I am in no way or shape not arguing for Christianity or any of this, but it's just historically true that you find this a lot of times in these movements that are very radical. So in 1831, this guy Finney, he begins to allow women to pray out loud in gatherings of men and women. This is not done. Okay, this is extremely radical, but he did it. And there are historians who say this is the beginning of the women's movement. It's because he let them speak out loud. Because it's a direct line from that to Seneca Falls. So William Lord Garrison is another major figure. He's one of the founders of the American Anti-Slavery Society. He's publisher of the journal The Liberator, which was the main abolition newspaper. He argues the most radical edge, the immediate and uncompensated emancipation of all enslaved people. So he's got the radical end of that movement, and his whole life he never budges from that. He's opposed to all the more moderate positions of anything about gradual or compensated emancipation. It's now, nobody gets any money, this is just wrong, and we have to stop it. So he's a real firebrand. And these are the same people. They're advocating for the simplest and also the most radical position, that everyone is inherently equal and should have access to education and full participation in the life of the polis. So there was eventually an enormous fracture in the abolition movement between those who thought women should get the vote and those who didn't. Garrison was on the correct side of that split, and he never stopped fighting for women's suffrage. But women literally get a voice for the first time, and some of them go from speaking in church to speaking in public meetings, and then to speaking to the general public on the abolition circuit. So they cut their teeth as public speakers, and they get the American public used to the idea that women are now going to talk in public. And they learn a whole set of skills and a whole set of political ideas, and then they apply those ideas to their own lives. So, Married Women's Property Act, this is where it all starts. So these are laws that start being enacted by individual states in 1839. Women did not even own the clothes on their backs, okay? They owned nothing. And this, state by state, they start to address it. And this is the economic side of coverture. And coverture is the legal concept that a woman is subsumed under her husband when she marries. She has no independent economic or legal existence. Okay, she belongs to him. And so women start fighting this. They realize we need something that's ours, a little bit of our own money. We are essentially enslaved, and we're going to have to change the law. So they couldn't own property, control their own wages, sign contracts. They couldn't decide where their children lived. They couldn't get a divorce. They were just their men's property. And of course, rape, battering, and imprisonment were all legal. They were perfectly legal. So this gave married women some new economic rights, and that's a great foothold to get the rest of it done. They didn't address the political side of coverture, but they did address the economic side. 5 women who organized Seneca Falls. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she's the driving force behind that convention. She worked on women's property rights first, and then she moves on to suffrage. That's the obvious next step. Lucretia Mott's a Quaker from Philadelphia. She's well known for her anti-slavery and then women's rights and then religious reform activism. So they meet in London in 1840. So they had both traveled across the ocean to go to this huge, the World Anti-Slavery Convention, which is this enormous event of everyone who wants to put an end to slavery. They go with their husbands. Stanton, I think, was on her honeymoon. This is what they did. They get there, and the convention has excluded women. Women are not allowed at the convention. So they spend the first 2 days arguing. And the more radical of these men are like, this is crazy, we're letting the women in. And they have to finally come to a compromise where they say, okay, women can come in and they're going to sit in the balcony. They're not allowed to sit on the floor with the men, and they're certainly not allowed to speak. And that's as good as they could get it. Based on their rage about this, Stanton and Mott decide, we're going to have our own convention. This cannot stand. So we are assembled to protest against a form of government existing without the consent of the governed. So this is straight out of the Enlightenment. Government exists because we agree to it, and we're supposed to get something from it, which is our protection, and we're not getting anything. We're being taxed without representation. We have no freedom at all, and we're here to we're going to start fighting this now. And I just want to highlight this: to have such disgraceful laws as give man the power to chastise and imprison his wife. By chastise, they mean beat. It was perfectly legal for men to beat women. In prison, your husband could lock you in a room and leave you there for 20 years. There was nothing illegal about that. He could also drag you off to an insane asylum and just leave you there. And if you weren't crazy when you went in, you were certainly crazy by the time you got out. And there was nothing anybody could do to get you out of there. So this is what they're fighting about. These are horrendous levels of human abuse. The convention proceeded to discuss 11 resolutions on women's rights. They all passed unanimously, except for the 9th one, and that was the one that demanded the right to vote. Even the women in that room were like, I don't know, that's a little too radical, everybody. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass apparently gave impassioned speeches, and it barely passed, but it did. So yay, we are off to the races. Okay, a few more women who played huge roles. Sojourner Truth. She's born into slavery in New York in 1797. She experienced all manner of beatings and rape and horrendous traumas. She's had a very hard life. In 1826, she escapes with her infant daughter, and that was a year before New York had abolished slavery. So she's had to spend a year in hiding, essentially. But she then spends the rest of her time on Earth working for abolition, for full suffrage, and then, of course, men get the vote first, so then property rights for all women and women's suffrage. She's deeply involved in the religious community that I mentioned. This is her motivating force, a great deal of strength she draws from this, and she just goes on to be a real, like a powerhouse in this movement. She's a very popular preacher on the circuit. So as a woman, and especially as a Black woman, they love her. She's invited everywhere to speak. She apparently was an incredible orator, and she really does help break down some of those boundaries against women not being able to speak. That "Ain't I a Woman" speech is completely apocryphal. She did not give that speech. I know that breaks everybody's hearts. Her first language was Dutch, and she lived in New York State. She would not have spoken with a Southern dialect like that. It's just, there's no way she said it. So it's sad, but there it is. And we have nobody who saw that conference and that speech has anything to say like that about what she said. So I'm sorry to break your hearts, but that's just not a thing. She may have said, things to that extent, but that's not what she said. Anyway. Harriet Tubman. Yay. She's born into slavery in 1822 in Maryland, so it's just below the Mason-Dixon line. As a child, she's both beaten and flogged, and she also received a serious head injury when she was trying to protect another enslaved person. For the rest of her life, she had terrible headaches and seizures from that blow to the head, but she also had visions that she considered divine revelations. And this is what's fascinating about her life. You can take it or leave it, but she thought God was speaking to her. And she had anecdote after anecdote about her time as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. They would miss a stop, something would happen, they would get lost, she didn't know where they were, and she would take a nap for 10 minutes. She would lie down and pass out, and when she woke up, take it or leave it, she had full instructions on what to do next. And she said her visions never let her down. Like Joan of Arc, I don't know, this happens. I don't know. You take it or leave it. I'm not telling you all to be religious people, believe in what you want. I know, but that was her story. And she never lost a passenger on that railroad. Never once. She never got caught. And it would be like, you cross a stream, you're going to go a mile down, there's a white house. Go there. And it worked every time. So, I don't know. In 1849, at the age of 27, she finally escapes to Philadelphia. She made about 13 missions, as far as we know, back into Maryland. She rescued about 70 people, and this is especially her family and friends. So, and I just got a story here about being the oldest girl in a family. One of the last people she went back for was her father, because he kept saying, I'm too old, I'm too sick. He was pretty disabled. He was no way going to be able to walk. And she, of course, was determined to bring him to freedom. And she had brothers. I just need to say, she had brothers with their male shoulders and their male muscles. Did anybody go and help her?
Nope.
Not a one. We know who got the job done. It's the daughter. She hauled him through the swamps of Maryland with a handcart because he couldn't walk.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you think a male in that family could have helped her? No, it had to be the daughter. She got it. We know what the women do. She got it done. Anyway, she goes on in the Civil War. She worked as a nurse, but she was so much better than that. I mean, nursing is a hard profession, but she had way different skills. So they put her up as a scout. She was fantastic. She went in as a spy and did incredibly heroic things. So she should be like, she's like our Reacher or something. Like she's just this amazing superhero. And then after the war, she worked for women's suffrage. So she was once asked whether she believed that women ought to have the vote, and she replied, I suffered enough to believe it. So this is our radical triumvirate of who won us the vote. You got Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage. So as we'll see with the Pankhursts in England, she came from a multi-generational family of activists fighting for abolition and for women's rights. None of this comes from nowhere, right? Everybody comes out of a radical community. Like this has been going on for 100 years already. So these ideas are not brand new. They've been fighting and fighting and fighting already. People have dedicated everything to these causes, and they're still fighting. I'm like, the end is nowhere near in sight yet. So extended groups of people, and they make this whole culture of activists. Frederick Douglass is a guest at her family's home. She's lifelong friends with him, and she's also lifelong friends with Harriet Tubman. So these are people all working together. She starts collecting signatures, anti-slavery petitions at age 16. So as soon as she's allowed to go out in the world, she does it, and she starts collecting. Her first feminist action was for the property rights, which is the thing women did first in this country. And then in 1856, she organizes anti-slavery meetings of her own throughout the state. And it's, again, that very radical demand. Her slogan is no compromise with slaveholders, immediate, unconditional emancipation. So angry mobs of men are constantly shutting her down. And she was utterly fearless in facing them down. She never flinches. There's mob action that's so bad the police have to come, and it's everywhere from Albany to Buffalo, all across the state. The police have to escort her out for their own safety multiple times. The local newspaper says rotten eggs were thrown, benches were broken, knives and pistols gleamed in every direction. So she's facing down really serious violence just to be able to talk in public. Also, of course, her message, but they really hated that women said it. So she has this uncompromising, radically egalitarian vision. And this was a time when abolitionists were debating. Anyway, this is still at a moment, people are debating, okay, let's say we win abolition, what happens next? So Abraham Lincoln is suggesting, and a lot of people, I mean, they founded this country called Liberia so that freed enslaved people would have somewhere to go. And Abraham Lincoln is suggesting maybe that's what happens next. Like nobody really knows, but not Susan B. Anthony. This is her quote. Let us open to the colored man all our schools. Let us admit him into all our mechanic shops, stores, offices, and lucrative business avocations. Let him rent such a pew in the church and occupy such seat in the theater. Extend to him all the rights of citizenship. So she has a vision of a completely integrated egalitarian world, the world that we live in now, where you go to the store, you go to a movie theater, you go to school, you just go about your business, and you see a million different people of a million different skin tones, and you don't even think about it. Nobody was thinking about this until these very radical, tiny little group of people were like, what are you talking about? We're not shipping people back to Liberia. We're just going to accept that we're all people. And at the time, this is like not done. And she is one of the people who puts this forth as there's no compromise. We have to go all the way with this. They're not just like, oh, well, we have to take care of these people. They're basically children. She's like, no, they're going to be full citizens. What is wrong with you all? Anyway, there's a diary entry in 1861. She just drops this in. That had a fugitive slave for Canada with the help of Harriet Tubman. Like, this is just what we do every day. During the Civil War, they conduct her and Harriet Tubman, they conduct the largest petition drive that had ever happened. They collect nearly 400,000 signatures in support of abolition. Never been done before. That's a lot of foot leather that you got to wear through. So 1870 is the 15th Amendment. So she's 50 years old when the 15th Amendment passes. And in case you don't know, all men get the vote at that point. Not a single woman gets the vote. So as usual, the male left is like, sorry, we're putting men first. Yep. Their needs are greater. Never mind that women are imprisoned in their homes and beaten and raped. And, women have no bodily rights at all. Only the men. So all the men get it. And the women are crushed. It is just a terrible, terrible betrayal that it goes in that direction. They're left very bitter. So this is, again, the male left and women. It's a lesson we need to learn. So In 1872, they're pushing forward. Anthony gets arrested in Rochester, New York for voting. This was the plan. It's an act of civil disobedience. She wants her day in court. She wants to be able to argue that women have this right. They're being taxed. This is called slavery if you're being taxed without representation. It's the entire point of the American Revolution. She's not allowed to speak to defend herself during the trial. She is allowed to make a final statement. The judge keeps telling her to sit down and shut up, and she won't. She keeps talking. And then she's fined $100, and she refuses to pay it. And she refuses to pay it because she's not done. And she wants to keep getting into the legal system and arguing with them. And the guy basically gives her amnesty for the $100 because he doesn't want her back in court. He doesn't want women to be able to argue. And the same thing happens in England over and over, where women keep pushing and they keep trying to just keep them out of the system. It's the easiest way, just shut them out completely. Oh, well, you don't have to pay for it. We don't care. Keep your $100. And she's like, I wanted to get in there again. She wants to get to the Supreme Court, ultimately. That's the goal, is to get in there and argue that we are citizens. And they're just blocking her at every turn. But her trial marks the beginning of the focused battle to win the vote in the USA. So she starts this, like, we're going to do this now, women, we got to. 14 other women go with her, but they're not allowed a foothold anywhere. So anyway, 1878, Anthony and Stanton, they get an amendment for Congress that would give women the right to vote. And this is eventually ratified as the 19th Amendment, which is 1920, when we got the vote. But it's 50 years after men get universal suffrage that women get the vote. And Anthony didn't live to see it, and neither did Stanton or Gage. So the three of them, who were really the architects of this, they all died before it happened.
Was that all women, or was it like the UK where you would have to be over a certain age?
No, it was absolutely, it was, I think at that age, the voting age was 21, but it didn't go in stages. It was just, boom, that's it, everybody. And then there were battles women had to fight on the state level because, of course, the states in the South threw up all kinds of barriers for black people voting. And so then you had the civil rights movement and everything that comes next. But the 19th Amendment alone is just, yep, it's women, everybody gets to vote. So there was no more barrier after that on a federal level. It was all just, all right, here we are. So this is her gravestone. I don't know if you've ever seen, I love this. It makes me cry. On voting day, women, well, I guess men too, but mostly women, they go with it. You get that little sticker that says I voted, and they go, if you live in upstate New York, you go and you do this, you put that on her grave. So, I don't know. She worked really hard. Okay, so, sorry, I haven't had enough sleep in like 2 weeks. Getting a little bit emotional. So she's at first treated with all kinds of contempt and ridicule, especially for speaking in public. And she's accused, of course, of trying to destroy the institution of marriage and like all the stuff you get accused of. But public perception shifts dramatically over her lifetime. And by the time she's 80 years old, her birthday is celebrated at the White House. So she really managed to like establish this as a cause that everybody needed to get behind. She made people love her on top of everything else. Okay, so this is Matilda, Jocelyn, Gage, the sort of the other part of that triumvirate. She's the most radical of the three of them. You think that Susan B. Anthony was radical. Wait till you meet Matilda. So her parents are also abolitionists. Their home is a station on the Underground Railroad. You're going to hear this story over and over about these people. They are all part of this movement, that multi-generational culture of resistance. As an adult, she almost went to prison for hiding people on the Underground Railroad. She managed to get out of it, but only barely. She's essentially the architect of the U.S. suffrage movement. She creates the institutional structure that got this done because it was massive in 50 states. To build that kind of an organization, but she's the one who got that done. It was kind of chaotic before she came along, and she sort of, like made the thing happen. She's also a prolific editor and a writer, and she made feminist arguments available to the general public in a way that nobody else had been able to do. Her most famous work is really radical. It's called Women, Church, and State. It's published in 1893, and this is where she lost the general public. The church was the root of women's oppression. Because it sees women as inferior and inherently sinful. This is absolutely the root of it as far as she's concerned. The greatest injury to women arose from theological laws that subjugated woman to man. And the church people don't like this. And she also argues there was an ancient matriarchy that disappeared because of Christianity. So her book splits the movement. The more conservative suffrage groups like that are involved with the temperance movement, they're a lot more, you wouldn't call them liberals or progressives or radicals. They're absolutely coming from a conservative point of view, and they hate this. They hate this book. And in fact, the book was banned under the Comstock Act, which is quite an honor. So in 1876, Gage and Stanton write the Women's Declaration of Rights and the Articles of Impeachment against the government of the United States. So they intend to impeach the United States government for essentially holding them in slavery. And this is a quote from their beautiful document. We are assembled to protest against a form of government existing without the consent of the governed. So this is, like the center of the Enlightenment stuff here. We're taxed and we don't have representation, and these are these disgraceful laws, and we're here to impeach you. And so they realize that they're going to have to take up more confrontational tactics. So they do, and they start getting way more radical. So these are two examples of the kind of good trouble that they get up to. There's a celebration of the American Centennial, so it's 1876, and the vice president was William Wheeler, and he walks onto the podium to give his big speech, and they rush the stage. There's a whole bunch of them. They storm onto stage, and they present him with this declaration, like, you are hereby impeached. And they get national attention for this. It's the first time that's happened. And it's all about get women the vote. So they keep at it. In 1886, the Statue of Liberty arrives from France. There's a huge national dedication ceremony. All eyes are on the Statue of Liberty. It's pretty amazing. And Matilda Jocelyn, she thinks this is a terrible symbol because it's a gigantic lie, a travesty, and a mockery that a woman is supposed to symbolize freedom and women are not free. So they rent a cattle barge and they disrupt the ceremony by floating along in front of it all and shouting through their speeches through bullhorns. This is at a time when women still weren't allowed to speak in public, and they're screaming at bullhorns, all these important people. Anyway, they have all kinds of fun, but they build the movement by getting this kind of national attention. They keep pulling these stunts because they know that newspapers will report on it. But they break through that social barrier of women's inability to speak in public, and really that's just huge. Okay, so women were property of their fathers and then their husbands. So until the Married Women's Property Acts start getting passed state by state, they don't even own their clothes, and never mind their clothes, they don't even own their backs. Okay, men are allowed to beat them. And sexual violence, they see this as the largest source of harm to women. This is central to their analysis, and we never hear about it. The fight for both property rights and for the vote, they weren't fights for something cute, quaint, or symbolic. They were deadly serious fights to stop egregious lifelong harms for which women had no recourse at all. So this is a phenomenal book this is Sheila Jeffrey's first book, and it's The Spinster and Her Enemies, and if you haven't read it, you should. And Sheila Jeffreys is the most important radical feminist theorist alive today. That's my claim. I think it's true. At the same time as the fight for the vote and for economic rights, the fight specifically against male violence is also happening. So women are naming rape, prostitution, and child sex abuse as widespread and tremendous horrors that they are, and they're politically organizing to stop them. And they are also suggesting both marriage resistance and even lesbianism as possible bids for freedom. We don't hear about these women. We don't hear about their analyses or their victories because, as ever, this is the core of patriarchy. And every generation, the women fighting it have to be erased, and they have been. This is a quote. It's a little bit long, so we're not going to go through the whole thing, but we were quite aware that this issue has been central to this is Sheila Jeffrey's voice. We were quite unaware. So she's talking about, she's in the late 70s herself, into the 80s, and she's working in helping establish rape crisis centers and all this. And she says, as feminists, we were quite unaware that this issue had been central to the concepts of a previous generation of feminists. I was a historian by training, and I was amazed to discover that there had been a massive feminist campaign against men's sexual abuse of children in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, of which contemporary feminists knew almost nothing. So she's super excited to find out about these women, and she realizes that they were trying to get heavy sentences for male abusers, changing the law to raise the age of consent, and they were questioning ideas about sexuality itself, and that there was a double standard, that none of it was about women's pleasure or sensuality, and what did rape and the compulsory nature of sexual intercourse, how did these go together? All of this stuff had been going on. It went on for 50 years in the first women's movement, and none of us knew about it. And so she wanted to know, what were they saying, but also, why was it stopped? Like, what happened to these women? So this is all from her book. There's a movement that's called social purity, and this is where a lot of the feminists start making these arguments about male sexual violence and male sexuality. So the feminists in the Ladies National Association, they are inspired by somebody named Josephine Butler, who becomes sort of the head of this whole thing. and they inveigh against the double standard of sexual morality, which enforced such abuse of women in order to protect the health of men, who, as they pointed out, had infected the prostitutes in the first place. So what happens is there's this sort of, we think of it as like sexual puritanism in Victorian England, and that's supposed to have given way to the first sexual revolution in the 20th century. But the feminist perspective on this is really different, because there's this massive campaign by women to transform male sexual behavior and protect women from it. And so we don't hear reference to this when we hear histories of the women's movement, but this is a whole other world that women were involved with. And a lot of them were also involved in the suffrage campaign. So it's the same women, and this is a part of their movement that's just been, erased from the history books. When historians have mentioned the work of the same feminist campaigners in the area of sexuality, they represent them as prudes and as Puritans, and they are sort of a laughing stock. They're made fun of. But their activities and demands have been seen as challenging and progressive in other areas. But the moment it gets to this analysis of male sexual behavior, all of a sudden they're seen as backward and retrograde. So, okay, next slide. So the effect of this thing, the sexual revolution in the 20s, it completely cripples the feminist campaign to assert women's rights to control their bodies. And there's this woman, what is her first name? Hang on. She has a double last name, which is Wolstenholme-Elmy. I think her first name is Elise. And what she wants is free from all uninvited touch of man. Like, she's got it, that women are constantly being violated and it has to stop. And Sheila Jeffreys writes, this aim has never been given its deserved significance by historians as part of the range of political objectives of the 19th century women's movement. This may be because the right to bodily integrity has not been included in the political platform of any male political struggle. And only those objectives which men have seen to be important for themselves have been given serious attention. Men are not subject to physical invasion by a powerful ruling class and can take possession of their own physical space for granted. Women's right to escape from being the involuntary object of men's sexual desires has not earned itself a place in the pantheon of human rights. Women's, quote, frigidity became an issue in the 20s as attempts were made to construct a female sexuality which would complement that of men. The struggle of women to assert their right to say no gradually faded into insignificance, whilst male sex theorists debated astride the conquered territories of women's bodies. So this is the social purity movement. So contemporary historians take on this, the sexual revolution ideas, because that's sort of, just sort of the tenor of the times now. And they see these women as evangelical, anti-sex, repressive, that this is their movement. And they miss the entire point of the thing, which was the elimination of prostitution and ultimately all rape. That's what these women are after. And the only way this is repressive is if male sexual desire is a human right, and women and girls don't exist as humans, but as objects to be used. So women are being sacrificed for men's desires. And that's what these women say over and over again, and they're not having it. There were men in this movement, and they argued directly for male responsibility so that prostitution would cease to exist. If men simply stop, prostitution is over. And they are very clear to other men about that. But women argue that the male sexual urge was social, that it was not a biological problem. And this is really the first time anybody makes this argument. And they demand a rejection of the division of women into the pure and the fallen. So the whore and the mother, like the Mary Magdalene thing. They're very clear about that. And they're clear prostitution is created by demand. And hence men should be punished for it, not women. This is what we have now in the Nordic model. And they are arguing for this in 1880. And we don't know this. And they use the same arguments to talk about sexual abuse of children, rape, and street harassment, that all of this is of a piece and it has to stop. So there's sort of three ways that they start to institute their demands. First is direct service. So it's preventative work. They try to help girls who are runaways, essentially, to get them out of a situation that is essentially just going to be prostitution. So they set up like safe houses for them. They try to get them job training. They give them clothes and food, stuff they're going to need. And they also set up refuges for women who are leaving prostitution to help get them out. And it's the same stuff that women do now to help these girls and women. They do a lot of education and public speaking. This is the first time anyone has made these arguments. Speaking in public, which they're not supposed to do. They're saying words like sperm out loud. I mean, it's like no one is doing this. And they're like, No, this is how diseases spread. It's because men are having sexual intercourse and their sperm is carrying disease. They say this point blank. And they also believe that women and the girls need to be educated about their bodies and about how you get pregnant and what sexual abuse is. And this is where we get this concept of the birds and the bees. Women wrote books for children that explained reproduction. This is how flowers reproduce. This is how insects reproduce. This is how mammals reproduce. And they wanted all the girls to be educated about it so that they could understand what was going on. And then there's political lobbying, and they mean it. They repealed the Contagious Diseases Acts. These were horrible. What these acts said was that women in prostitution are the ones who are spreading disease. So if the police thought that you could be in prostitution, they were allowed to get you off the street and take you to a horrible room and give you a physical exam, a pelvic exam, and see if you had syphilis. It's not. We have to turn it on and off constantly. So.
No.
Is it back on?
It's just
Okay.
on the speaker.
And so they were like, it's men who are creating the problem. It's not women. Why are you arresting women and violating their bodies in this way? And a lot of women who weren't even being prostituted were swept up in these raids. It was just horrendous. And we're like, we're not drawing a line between the good women and the bad women. No woman should have to do this. And from there, it's like, well, why is there prostitution? It's because men think they have a right to do this to us, and we're not having it. So they raised the age of consent from 13 to 16. And they're trying to get laws passed that would make men accountable for being for using prostituted women. So, for instance, all Johns should be disqualified from holding any public office. I wish we had that now. You know, like this is what they're aiming for.
What year is this?
So this is like 1880 through 1900, and then up into the more radical stuff. So really up until the First World War. So this is this Jane Ellis Hopkins versus James Hinton. So these people were friends. They met doing preventative work, but Hopkins shaped the social purity movement as we know it more than anyone, but her name is nearly lost to history. So a lot of these are, her very radical arguments. She was determined to save girls from all abuse, particularly prostitution, but all rape and all incest. And so, this is just what she does with her life. But Hinton, the man that she's friends with, he's also a lifelong campaigner, but the differences between their goals are quite stark. Hinton, the guy, believes that prostitution could be eliminated by rehabilitating women's sexuality. So if the wives and the other women should just be more compliant to what men wanted, they would stop going to prostitutes. So this is his way out of this, is we just need to, and this is what they all take up, the sexologists, Freud, it's all about rehabilitating women to men's desires. And this is what goes on. Havelock Ellis becomes the first sexologist. And he's inspired by reading Hinton. This is where he gets his ideas. And he creates a whole psychological theory which attempts to get women to eroticize their own subordination in the service of men's sexuality. So this is where the thing ends. And this is the world we still live in. And it's only gotten worse because of, prostitution or pornography taking over. This is a huge long quote, which we don't have time for, but it's,
We have more time.
yeah, but I don't want to take over the
No,
next.
we're switching things.
Okay, because it's already like 10:30, and I'm not even halfway. I'm more than halfway done, but anyway, social purity. Anyway, this is just the point: is that you've got the more sort of conservative religious people, especially the more patriarchal ones, are saying, no, it's women that are the problem, and of course the feminists are always arguing it's not women that are the problem, it's men who are the problem, and this just goes back and forth. So. The bodily slavery of the wife is still a principle behind English law, but some legal battles were won to improve the right of a woman to control her own body. So we have the 1884 Matrimonio Causes Act. It ends the power of the husband to imprison his wife, especially over. He was allowed to just lock you up if you wouldn't have sex with him, and they end this in 1884. Women had to fight for that. And then if you didn't want to live with your husband anymore, you were actually allowed to leave, because up until then, he could send the police to seize you anywhere you were in the country and bring you back to him. So women have to fight for this, and they're very clear that it's about rape and battering and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to end on this part. You need to understand this part. Why did all this happen in upstate New York? It's the back end of nowhere. You'd think it would be Boston, where all this shit was on fire with the really radical abolition people, or maybe Quaker Philadelphia, which was like the secondary network. Why upstate New York? There's a reason. That's the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois people. And it's a matrilineal, matrifocal culture in which rape did not exist. This is a rape-free culture. And they're a living example of what we talked about yesterday, Heide Guntner Abendorf's thesis about matrilineal cultures, living example. So you need to read this book, Sisters in Spirit. It's all explained. The women who formed the most radical core of the suffrage movement were all friends with First Nations women. They were all friends with Haudenosaunee women. They saw in person a culture in which women owned the property, where women and men made decisions together in small groups, and violence against women was unthinkable. There was no rape in this culture. And they all knew each other, so this is just, more evidence that Matilda, Jocelyn, Gage was actually adopted by Iroquois women. She was given a new name in their language. It means she holds up the sky. This is a beautiful name. And then there's this list, we don't have time, there's this beautiful list of how these cultures are so different. So the children are members of the mother's clan, patrilineal, nobody even cares. Violence against women is basically unthinkable, but if whatever were to happen, it would just be completely dealt with in the moment, because a woman is surrounded by her uncles and her brothers. Like, you would never go and hit a woman in front, like, even if she's smaller than you, her men are right there. They're going to throw you out. Like, it's not going to happen. The work is very satisfying. It's done communally. It's not drudgery. It's not isolated. Just on down the whole list of how completely different this culture is from what the Euro-American women knew. And so I just really encourage you to read that book, because it's called Sisters in Spirit. It's right here. It's written by Sally Rosh Wagner, and you can get it very easily. It may be out of print, but you can get it for like $5 used. So they all... they saw this in living color. They saw how amazing this completely different culture was. And and a lot of them wrote about it. There were books written. There were a lot of the newspapers at the time wrote about it. And just this quote at the bottom, a stereotype feminist most commonly known for her anti-slavery writing, and they were particularly moved by the fact that Indian men did not rape. This is noted over and over again in this literature. Okay, I'm going to try to make this shorter. Let's see. Okay, we got one more slide. Tell the readers of the Herald that they have sincere respect for women, their own women as well as those of the whites. I have seen young white women going unprotected, i.e. with no other men with them. So just young women going around to parts of the reservation in search of botanical specimens. That was a thing that Victorians loved, was to collect specimens, and they would draw them and stuff. Anyway, they would go out in search of specimens, and they would have Indian men help them. They would be their guides, and they would show them different flowers and stuff. Where else in the land can a girl be safe from insult, from rude men who she does not know? But you could trust your daughters to the Indian men, because they did nothing to them that was of any danger, of any problem. So they did not rape. And our girls saw that and were like, we can do this. They didn't just dream it up. And that's the beauty of this. Like, they saw it in living color. They knew it was possible. They weren't just dreaming about it. And this is a debt that we all owe, because this was the radical bunch that really made everything possible that we have done since, because they want us to vote. They want us property rights. They want all that, all this incredible stuff that we now have rights for. That was done for us. And a lot of that inspiration came from the First Nations women. So we just need to remember that, that's our debt. So, and that's where the inspiration came from. So tomorrow, we're going to end on an upbeat note. WSPU, the Turn to Women's Militants, and that is part 2. Thank you. I'm sorry we're late.